All right, everyone, welcome. Apologies for starting a few minutes late. Welcome. Today is our April 16th work session of the Wake County Board of Education. Getting everybody set up, we have a quorum of members, and we'll begin with our first item of business on our agenda. It looks like it is review of the external audit contract recommendation. I see Ms. Posey, David Nieder, and Mr. Coble down there. Oh, and Ms. Bynum-Patterson, too. Good to see you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Haggerty, members of the board, and Superintendent Dr. Taylor. Today's agenda includes a review of the board's audit committee recommendation to award the external audit contract. Board policy 8221 requires an annual independent financial audit of the Wake County Public School System. Today we have with us the audit committee chair and vice chair to share the audit committee's recommendation. Charles Coble is the committee chair, who is an attorney with Brooks Pierce, and the vice chair is Faith Bynum-Patterson, who is a CPA, MBA, and business owner. The purpose of the audit committee, as established in Board Policy 8810, is to assist the board in the process of procuring an independent audit firm and reviewing the audit of the financial statements before presenting them to the board. The policy directs the board to nominate members of the committee with a strong financial management or related background. The committee's current membership represents that, and there is also one attorney. The audit contract is bid every 3 years to maintain a competitive environment. The current contract has completed its third year, and a request for proposal was conducted. On March 21st, 2024, staff reviewed the RFP proposals with the board's audit committee and supported the contract award recommendation. David, do you have anything you'd like to add? All right. I will now turn the presentation over to Mr. Coble and Mrs. Bynum-Patterson to provide you with their recommendations.
Okay, good afternoon, board members. Again, my name is Charles Coble. I'm chair of the audit committee. And I'll begin just by thanking all of you for your service to the families and students of Wake County, of which my family is one of the beneficiaries, so thank you. As Ms. Posey described, we've been through, in the past month, consideration of a recommendation for the next 3-year contract with the external auditors. We have been in a cycle of reviewing those every 3 years, although the contract is terminable after 1 year and has been that way. So we can each year consider whether, and with staff, whether the provider of the audit services is acceptable. So I'm just going to hit very quickly the high points of our consideration, and then myself and Ms. Bynum-Patterson and Mr. Nieder, Ms. Posey can answer any questions that any board members may have. So the request for proposal was distributed, and the county received 3 proposals that staff deemed acceptable and worthy of consideration. One of those was from Forbes, which is the incumbent audit firm. We have been with them the past 3 years, and before that we were with Dixon Hughes, which merged into Forbes. So while in some respects we've had the same firm for 6 years, really there's been a significant change in the nature of that firm over that period. So we don't feel like we've been too long with one group in place. So as we look and consider, the staff looked and considered at those, Ms. Posey, along with Ms. Fuller and Ms. Wellens, who's over here, analyzed each of those bids and proposals on a number of different factors. You know, not just any CPA firm, of course, can audit a school system like Wake County's. And so an important consideration is the size and makeup of school systems that the audit firms have worked with in the past. So one of the firms that we considered had dealt with some large school systems, but none in North Carolina. A second firm had worked with school systems in North Carolina, but none as large as Wake County. And then Forbes has worked not only, of course, with Wake County, but also with Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Guilford, and Winston-Salem. So they've stood out in regards to their relevant experience. So that was a clear winner in that regard. Number two, of course, cost is important. The proposal from Forbes, which would be $75,000 in year one, $77,300 in year two, and $79,600 in year three, is in line with the current cost of Forbes and is within budget. In contrast, the other two proposals were significantly higher. The first firm starting at $150,000, so double the proposal, and the second one at $118,000, which is more than 50% higher. So the cost considerations clearly pointed in favor of Forbes. And then thirdly, since the Forbes is the incumbent, staff has been working with Forbes. They've had a good working relationship. They reported positive interactions with them. And of course, continuing that with them would eliminate or minimize ramp up or learning curve time. Of course, it is important to make sure that perspectives continue to be fresh. So the staff, if the recommendation is adopted, intends to ask Forbes to make sure that there are new audit team members on the team that actually conduct the audit. So sort of synthesizing all of that, it was the staff's recommendation that the board approve a contract with Forbes for a 3-year period. As I said before, again, we can review that and we'll consider that each year and hear from Mr. Nieder, Ms. Posey, and their team members whether the relationship is going as hoped and as expected, or whether there's any reason to consider rebidding. But it's a 3-year contract. The board met, as Ms. Posey said, the audit committee, met on March 21st. We heard from the staff. We reviewed the materials submitted, and ultimately we agreed with the recommendation of the staff. So, sort of to get then to the finish line, on the board's consent agenda for today is consideration of a proposed contract with Forbes for approval, and it's the audit committee's recommendation that the board approve that contract. And with that, I'm happy, Ms. Lina Patterson is happy to answer any questions that the board members have.
Thank you, Mr. Coble. So again, this is work session. We don't vote on it, but since the recommendation is to have this on our consent agenda, I would ask if anyone has any questions about the recommendation, any objections, or anything that we can discuss now, so that if we're all in favor, we could put it up. Ms. Mahaffey.
Well, my only question was, I thought we had been going with Forbes, but Mr. Coble answered the changes on how that is, so thank you for that explanation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
To clarify, it is on the consent agenda this evening.
Yes. Dr. In?
Question. Is there any substantive differences in the way the 3 different groups would do things? Or I mean, it's, I'm just wondering how come there's such a wide difference in cost?
Well, that's a good question. It is staffing is an important consideration, and maybe I should have noted that too. The staffing was consistent across the 3 proposals, so there's not like significantly a larger number of members that were associated with the higher proposals. I think that, and I'll defer to Mr. Nieder on this one, but I think that some firms look at this type of work as a public service and are willing to discount the proposal perhaps more than some others.
Yes, and I believe what Mr. Coble just stated is likely the backstory, in that being able to count Wake County Public School System as one of their clients has value in and of itself. And to your other question, Dr. Ng, any audit firm conducting the audit follows auditing standards, so they would all do the work in the same manner.
You want to comment on that, General, the gap?
Well, it's covered by GAAP, GASB, Yellow Book laws. It gets pretty technical.
So any certified public accounting agency in this area would all have to follow the same standard principles?
Correct.
And the list, when we put out the request for proposal, it goes to anyone who's listed on the LGC site as providing services to Wake County, and they also provide the services to school systems. So the RFP did go out to everyone listed on the local government commission's website.
Thank you. Any further questions? Ms. Caulfield?
Just for clarification, because I know I've been asked this question a couple of times, and I know we had discussed it a few times, but just because we are bringing it to the board, can you explain the difference between the other audits and this financial audit? What is the difference this audit does for us?
This audit is...
In a nutshell.
It's required by law.
Right.
And it looks at, in essence, it looks at the financial statements and verifies that they accurately represent the actual financial condition of the district. That's at the 500,000-foot level. They do some testing of internal controls. They interview staff. They look at inventory to make sure they do sampling. Sampling is an important part of any large audit. They do sampling of the inventory, for example, bus parts, other inventories we have at the warehouse to supply our schools. And they are required to do what's called a single audit on federal funds. And they also pick a rotating department to audit on an annual basis. So they're really looking at the financial statements and are they accurately representing what is in place.
So in a nutshell, it's kind of like where we're putting our money. Ish? Or if this is what we're reporting, this is what they see where it went?
That's fair.
Okay.
Mrs. Caulfield, in November, I did a presentation to the board, and you received a book of all of our expenditures. So it is true year-to-date expenditures, and then we show those on an accrual basis, and we show them on a modified accrual basis, and that's where I showed that presentation in November of here's our fund balance, here's the trend of the fund balance over the past 10 years. And so the external audit firm basically audits our financials to confirm that the financial position of the board is sound, and then we report it in an annual comprehensive financial report.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
All right. Are there any other questions or any comments for the discussion? Ms. Johnson, or Vice Chair Johnson-Huxley.
Thank you. Not necessarily, not a question, but more of a comment. And again, thank you both having the privilege to serve on the committee. But I think one of the things that personally I would say as someone who runs an organization who does have to have a Yellow Book audit, but I also think it's important, and you noted staffing, Mr. Nieder, and it was alluded to, but I think it's important to directly say, just like there are all types of attorneys, right, Mr. Malone, there are also different types of auditors, and everyone can't do this level of work. And you didn't directly say it, so I think I can say that as a school board member, is that an accountant, a CPA, and an audit firm aren't all created to do the same level of work. So I wouldn't send my auditor who audits $2 billion over here to audit $2 billion in the complexity of our budget. And so I do think that in interviewing, and again, we discussed this in our committee, it is important that someone understand the scope, the scale, but also the distinct differences between federal, state, and literally our local funding. And so I just want to lift up, there are multiple reasons why there are not that many firms in the first place to choose from that would have this level of experience. And again, Ms. Edmonds just noted she has hers with her, and I think it's just important to note that our district goes through an extensive audit, and thanks to our staff and the audit committee, we fare very well because we take all the necessary precautions and thoughtfulness to ensure that we're choosing, and this next go around, a firm that's appropriate for our work.
Ms. Evans.
I was just going to say, just the public can see from the previous audit, the Forvis section is in the back. And I was looking at it for budget reasons, but it's in there for people who want to see it because this is a public document, what you presented to us for the last budget. So thanks.
Mr. Nieder.
And to follow up what Ms. Edmonds just shared, and both the budget documents, but here we're talking about the annual comprehensive financial report. They're all posted on the website, I think, for the last 15 years.
And not to cover previously covered materials, right? But as we know, the audit, one of the things that the auditor does is prepare a management letter, identify any significant deficiencies, any areas of concern for the governing bodies, and after review of this last one, were any of these discovered? Significant material, yeah.
There were no material deficiencies noted, and that has been the case for probably 10-plus years.
Go ahead and say it, your tenure.
All right.
Early on in my tenure, we had some findings.
Clean it up.
All right. If there are no other questions, no other comments, no other history lessons, what we'll do is we will have this item on our consent agenda, and I hope that you will all support it as part of the consent agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. All right, we're switching over. The next item we have is approval of our 7-year capital improvement plan and the resolution requesting funds for the capital improvement plan.
Traffic issue. Exactly. Well, we want to thank you for the opportunity to present the CIP update. Dave Burnett, Mark Strickland's listed on this, Jack McAleer is going to go over a lot of the details. As you probably know, this presentation is similar and is kind of a routine for previous years. We are still following that script. The items that have already come to the Facilities Committee, speed standards and legs, that was presented by Elizabeth Sharp, and program assumptions, student membership, that was presented by Marcella Rory, cost model, that was presented by Jack McAleer. The executive summary, that's what we just went over with the Facilities Committee at the last meeting. And so now we're at the final presentation and can get the details to you. What we are asking for this is for this to be approved and to go on the consent agenda for tonight's school board meeting. Jack? Thank you, Dave. So this was presented at last week's Facilities Committee. We'll recap the updates from this year. Changes from last year's plan are highlighted in light blue, and we'll stick with those exceptions. Feel free to ask any questions as we go along. So this is the new schools section of the CIP. The changes from last year's plan are we swapped the highlighted new ESTBD 1 with a renovation project on last year's plan, which was Wendell Elementary School renovation. The plan for this is to use this new ESTBD in the Eastern Wake area as swing space for the Wendell renovation to be completed after this new school is. And then also for FY31, we added a new elementary school, large model elementary school with design funds coming in line in the new fiscal year. And those are the only two changes as part of this year's plan to the new school section. Moving to the existing school summary, changes you'll see, the first one is for Athens Drive High School. At FY27, the funds are highlighted. If you recall, and for a refresher, when we were able to add Athens Drive High School to this plan 2 years ago in the 2022 update, it was modeled as a new elementary school. And based on feedback from the board, they wanted a renovated high school in the plan. In order to do so,
we had to use the new elementary school placeholder for that school. And so as such, new schools are slightly less expensive than renovation projects. And with this year's update, we weren't chasing adding escalation to the plan as we have been in the previous several years. And so we were able to right-size that cost model for this school to account for the renovation piece and that increase versus the new school budget.
Before we move off the existing school budget, Mr. Swanson, did you have a question?
I just had a question on the previous slide. For the new high school, at Morrisville High School, why is the location listed as West Cary/Morrisville instead of Morrisville?
That's a good catch. That might be a holdover of a previous year note that wasn't updated accordingly. So we can make that change for sure.
The only thing I can think of is if it's not talking about the actual location, but more of the base that it'll draw from. Just because the way those, you know how it's like you drive through Morrisville and then you're in Cary and then the next block you're in Morrisville?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my only theory. Okay.
Okay, moving down in the existing school summary, second change we come across is East Garner Middle School. Previously, that was listed as Washington Elementary School in last year's plan. As part of the North Garner Middle School renovation and the limitations of that site with not being able to add capacity as part of that project, the timing of such, East Garner was added to increase capacity at that location to account for the Garner needs. And as such, Washington Elementary School, as part of some tours that were done last summer with staff, the needs of that school did not rise to the level of a full renovation. So with the previous renovation of the gym and some other things done, along with some future renovations to be done with life cycle funds and such, the needs of Washington can be taken care of in that manner. Moving down the list to Wendell Elementary School, that is tied into the first item in the new school summary with switching that and using the new school as swing space for a Wendell renovation to start planning in FY28. And then the last two items on the new school, on the existing school summary are just design funds for new projects in FY31. So moving on to the program items. The only adjustments and changes from last year's plan, obviously FY31 comes into view with FY24 moving out, but the highlighted items you're seeing for print and SNAP in the outer 3 years are a net zero impact. We're shifting $10 million of SNAP funds into print funds for those years based on the current forecasted needs of those two programs.
And just for the public or anyone watching, can you briefly explain the difference between SNAP and PREP?
Sure. So SNAP is an acronym for Space Needs Analysis Program, and really that deals with administrative buildings, crossroads office buildings, for instance, and then specialty academic programs, STEM programs, flex academies, things of that nature. Like Rock Quarry Road, any renovations to those types of facilities or transportation facilities would be SNAP projects. PREP, that stands for partial renovations and improvements, which is for smaller renovation projects that don't rise to the level, the needs don't, to be a called out project on the existing school list. So we can kind of balance the need and hit more schools.
Thank you.
And so to summarize, CIP summary, total of $2.8 billion. Last year was 2.74. This is an increase of about 82 million, with most of that increase being based on FY31 differences from FY21 in escalation. We were able to increase two budgets based on the renovation versus new factor for about $10 million each.
All right.
So the plan is to take this to the board's full meeting tonight on the consent agenda for approval.
Thank you. So we've had discussion of the CIP, Capital Improvement Plan, in Facilities Committee. Most members have, at either one point or another, had a chance to ask about the plan, the structure. Are there any questions about, for Mr. McAleer or Mr. Burnett about the presentation tonight? Okay, I will just offer one general one, I think, for public consumption, which is, as you know, building right now These have been unstable times between inflation, cost overruns, supply chain issues. What happens with these projections in terms of the ability to be flexible and come in and make adjustments as we go forward?
Sure, absolutely. So what we've been chasing and the increases we have built in as part of the previous 3 updates, really since COVID hit, is building in escalation to account for the volatility and the price increases. Last year, I think, was a $30 million increase, which is low. The previous year was about $200 million that we added into the plan, along with another $100 million that we found with savings from older projects to fund existing projects. So we've been very flexible in where we have found money to fund those increases. Some of the decreases and some of the savings, a significant amount of them that we found, were due to the projects that hit during 2020, during the downturn, that came in significantly lower than anticipated. So we rolled that forward to use when we had significantly higher bids come in. We've also built in a lot of flexibility in the schedules and done a lot of things with the board in terms of bringing GMPs forward earlier and reconciling after we get bids in to account for some of the long lead times without having to delay projects a year. You know, if we save 2 months on the front end, we won't have to push it out a year on the back end. So that's been very beneficial to the district. And the flexibility in the plan moving forward is this year, with bid prices coming out of last year, we have right-sized the current projects are where the market is. And the forecast going forward is that we're getting back to a stable market. Every indicator in terms of the analysts' projections out in the market say that, as well as our own data points with bid prices and our projects confirm that. So if that holds true, we should be good to go. But each project has built into it its own project contingency to account for those types of overages, as well as, if you look at the second line item from the bottom, program contingency is essentially a management reserve to account for those types of changes as well.
All right, thank you. And just one other question that I had gotten from some constituents about this budget. This is the budget where we would see things like our security improvements and other things regarding like the physical safety in our schools. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
All right, thank you. All right, any last questions, Ms. Caulfield?
More of a comment, because I know we did discuss this in facilities with the technology, and it's one thing that kind of really stems to be pretty high on this chart and go up. And I know we did discuss trying to evaluate how we can do some other options in the classroom and such. But I know you said it's pretty much not timely enough for this budget, but we'll work for that for next year, because this is a projection to 31. So just wanted to kind of reiterate, it would be helpful, I think, if we can figure out how to kind of reverse those numbers a little bit.
I agree, and I think one of the things about the 7-year plan is that we can, as Mr. Mackler said, have some flexibility to make changes. We want to be able to project so far out, so when the county issues bonds or others, we can get an estimate on what that financing would look like. But if we come back next year and we look at some of those technology needs, or where we might be making changes at different grade levels, that could definitely impact those numbers. And then, if money comes out of one area, perhaps that finds other money we can use for other building improvements, life cycles, the SNAP and print projects, things like that. So, yeah, I think you're right on that. It's just going into tonight's budget, it would take, I think, some time to look and evaluate all those changes. Okay. All right. All right, well then this will be on tonight's consent agenda if there are no other questions. All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. So the last item on our work session, this is the superintendent's proposed budget. As you know, we've had one work session on this where staff addressed board member questions, went through, looked at areas of interest, areas of concern that board members had in the proposed budget. Board members have had an opportunity to ask additional questions, get additional detail, and then also to work on any potential questions or changes they might have in anticipation of tonight's meeting. Again, remember, we are on a timeline in terms of developing and passing a budget. a statutory deadline that we have to have this approved and sent over to the commission by, Mr. Nieder, May
15th.
May 15th. All right. So that's just my admonition to use this time wisely. Okay, Mr. Nieder, whenever you're ready, you can begin if you want to start with board member questions or any other introduction.
Okay, yes, thank you, Chair Hagerty. Start your work session on the budget by going through the board member questions that were submitted subsequent to the last presentation a couple weeks ago. And I do want to point out there are in simply two versions of the questions and answers. There's the original version, which was posted when the meeting was posted this past Friday, and a revised version was posted today. The primary reason for revising it is we caught a typo. There was a figure in one of the responses to the question about what would it cost to equip all schools with Narcan, and there were 3 extra zeros put into the initial answer, and it was $35 million, and it was supposed to be $35,000. In addition, though, we took the opportunity to add some clarifying to the existing responses. And finally, we added a question that came in, I believe, yesterday, and a staff response because we thought it was to the point and supportive of what the board will be discussing. All those changes I just referenced are highlighted in the revised version in green. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Ms. Kinsey to go through the Q&A, and then we will turn it back over to the board for their discussion.
Good afternoon. The first question was about the breakdown in both dollars and percentages of the teacher raises from the second year of the biennium budget compared to the current year. So Addendum 1 to the Q&A shows the Teacher A salary schedules for 2022-23, 23-24, and 24-25. And we've shown the changes both from the schedule as it is to a new schedule, what those percentages are, and the schedule as it would be if a teacher moved from one step to another. There's a set of schedules with just the state base, and then another set with the state base and supplement. The second question is what would be the cost for the non-certified minimum to be raised to $17.25, $17.50, or $17.75. The proposed legislative increase in the second year of the biennium budget of 3% that's already included in the superintendent's proposed budget would bring our minimum non-certified rate to $17.26 per hour. So the superintendent's budget has already met that $17.25. It would cost an additional $3.5 million excuse me, for non-certified staff to be at $17.50 an hour and $4.1 million to be at $17.75. The next question asked for an organizational chart, essentially for all departments and central services, also a list of the positions in every department and vacancies, along with titles and salaries. Addendum 2 shows all of that information for all positions in our 900 call center series, meaning the staff that work in the central services divisions. It does not include school-based staff or staff in the 800 series that are managed centrally but work in the schools every day. We are continuing to compile the organizational charts. We don't have a standard organizational chart that we've used in every department, but I feel like the information is in the schedule that's already added as Addendum 2, but we will provide the organizational charts once those are complete.
And Ms. Kinsey, if I could just add, and I would anticipate we should have those org charts complete within the next 2 or 3 days, and we will push them out.
Okay, thank you. Before we go on, could we need to get just a little clarification on this, Mr. Hirsch?
On question 2, on the non-certified minimums,
Yes.
it's $3.5 million to get to $17.50. Is it an additional $600,000 to get to $17.75, or an additional $4.1 million to get to $17.75? I just want some clarity on the way
It would be
was.
the difference.
It would be the smaller number.
So additional. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, it's not in addition to.
Okay.
Good question. Thank you.
On the Addendum 3, where we provided the worksheet that you might be able to use if you all are considering any changes to the budget, Those are shown independently, so it would either be the 3.5 million or the 4.1 million if you were to choose one of those options. Question 4 was more comments than it was a question, but there was one statement that we wanted to clarify. There was a statement that said several teachers and staff explained they did not see any increase in pay due to their level and years on the job. We just wanted to clarify that looking at including our local supplement, all employees received an increase in pay this year from last year.
And Ms. Kempsey, what we'll do is just, if there's a question about a specific one, let's just address them in order so that we don't have a big rush of them at the end.
That's great.
And Ms. Evans had one.
Yes.
So, question 3, can you talk about the staff that, you mentioned staff that work from central services, but they're in the schools every day. Can you say, just describe those a little bit more, please?
Yes, for example, a lot of our staff in the maintenance department may not be housed and working at Rock Quarry Road or here. They are working in schools every day doing work orders and serving the schools. They are not assigned to a specific school, so we use an 830 call center to imply that they are centrally managed, but every day they're working in schools. The same could be true for some of our behavioral health support positions. Some positions like counselors are actually assigned to a school number. Other positions may serve several schools and be in an 800 series because they're in schools every day, but not the same school every day.
Follow up?
Yeah, clarifying question for number 4. Is it possible that employees that may have reported they didn't get an increase, would that have anything to do with the increase in benefits, the cost of benefits? Because I feel like we have heard that comment from some of the NCAE members.
There can be reasons that it would look that way based on choices employees make every year with coverage for family or other things they select in terms of benefits each year.
Yeah, and if they change, for example, the number of exemptions for federal or state withholding, the important thing would be to look at not the net pay, but the gross pay before any voluntary deductions or tax withholding.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Caulfield and Dr. Ng?
I think one of the things that the comments that were being explained to me anyway was that when the teachers get an increase, they're getting an increase on the supplement, correct? Not on their base salary.
Well, for the current year, if I'm not mistaken, they also received teachers received a step increase as well as the increase of the supplement.
Right. So I think that there was certain people who were, I guess, positions in what grade they were and level they were at, that when they received, say, the 1.5% extra that we were giving, that actually either put them in a different position or it was a small amount that was significant enough that they weren't seeing a big increase. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. Well, and to point out, and you can look at one of the prior responses on teacher pay and your comparisons, there are certain steps that towards, I think, beginning on step 16, where there are many years where there, even with a step increase, there's no state-based increase. That said, though, year over year, the salary supplement has increased. So I would, I think, what was the question, number 1?
Yeah, addendum 1 might help with this. When you look at a salary schedule from the state, as David was describing, there may be a flat dollar value, say at step 15 through step 24. That's comparing a scale to a scale. But each year, as the state approved raises, those amounts will change and a teacher moves from one step to another.
And I would also just add that on the, I believe it's addendum number 3, which you also received 2 weeks ago, but we've updated it and added some things. It had what the investment or cost would be if the board wanted to increase the salary supplement, and or if they wanted to not only increase the supplement by 1%, but also add for those steps that are flat on the state schedule, add additional local supplement to those steps.
Yeah, I know we're going through it one by one, but if you look at the addendums, all that's broken out, so you can see a couple different options depending on maybe what you might be looking at or increases, what would be provided, and then also what the cost to the district would be, and so how you'd have to move that. Dr. A?
Yes, for question 3, can you clarify on the addendum to the salaries for unfilled positions? There's a dash, meaning that there's no number.
That's right.
Are they included in our budget in terms of are we accounting for those?
Yeah, it's a good question. The way I tried to answer this, and I don't think I'm doing a good job, is if we were to budget money for every position in the school system, we would have balances at the end of the year that we underspend. Because in a school system where we have 20,000 employees, everyday positions are vacant. So as we have a lot of historical data and we track information over time, we budget our salaries and benefits pretty tightly to our fill levels. That does mean that in budget, we have to move money from one salary code to another during the year, as a vacancy that was here is now filled and now that vacancy is there. So no, every position in the school system does not have money under it. It's not like I can take a list and say these don't. It's just the best way to describe it is we budget enough money to cover the positions that are generally filled over the course of a full year. And you'll note in the superintendent's budget, we do have a request in there for over $1 million because we're at the point now that it's a little too tight. Our fill rates are better, and some more of our restart schools have been added into that program, which means we lose some flexibility. So we need to tweak the total value to cover the positions. This addendum 2 shows the actual salaries for positions that are filled because we have the salaries for those employees. We did not put anything for the vacant position because there's no one in it and there isn't a salary right now. We wouldn't want to over budget by putting money behind every single position knowing we will not be fully staffed every day all year. We would be asking for too much funding than we need. Does that help?
Yes.
It's okay.
All right. Any other questions on these questions that Ms. Kinsey has already has addressed so far? All right. If not, then please proceed.
Okay. Question 5. This question is about our bus drivers needing to be closer to market rate and asking how much do we spend on CDL training and onboarding, and do we have data on how many have received their CDL and left after certification? So on the first part, to move our bus drivers closer to market rate, the cost to increase drivers to $20 minimum per hour would be an additional $1.1 million. For new hires, we pay about $260 per driver for onboarding. Our yearly expenditures, including renewal physicals for existing drivers, will be about $55,000 this year. Approximately 25% of the applicants who pass the CDL class with us never drive a bus.
Mr. Swanson, you had a question?
It's a question and a comment related to this. That last part, the 25% of the applicants who pass never drives a bus for us is a problem. Is there a way, I guess my question is there a way that we can put some requirements in there that says if you go through this process, you are required to work at least 3 years or reimburse us back? I don't know if that's...
Yeah, so you could absolutely put a requirement in that if they don't drive, then you get reimbursement. The problem with it, I don't necessarily say it's a problem, but if you say to a person you incentivize them to come and get certified that we pay for it, it doesn't cost them anything, then there's a greater opportunity that you're going to have that person to drive. But if they have to pay for it out of pocket, they may not do it at all. And so...
Well, I was just going to say, that's what we used to do. Mr. Nieder will be shaking his head, he remembers that. So we've gotten to this point, but I agree with Mr. Swanson that, if someone's just, hey, you can get your CDL, and then all of a sudden they have their CDL and they go to Amazon or FedEx or one of the other folks, I don't know. That was something that we talked with Mr. Winters at the time as a possibility.
Yeah,
I don't know
think
if that was ever explored.
I'll look at this practically as well as maybe philosophically. philosophically, Mr. Swanson, you're spot on with your comment. Bring it to, I guess, reality or day-to-day operations. We did switch to paying for these fees rather than have the employees get reimbursed after the fact to facilitate our recruiting efforts. Collecting, if they don't continue to work for us, would be an issue with the cost associated with it. And I would look at this potentially as a cost of doing business and competing in the marketplace.
Ms. Caulfield?
So the reason that I asked that question was because I felt like we're investing in you because we believe in you and want you to stay here. So our commitment in a contract to them up front to say, we're going to pay for this cost, but we want to make sure that you're happy to stay here with us. So is there something wrong with putting that in the contract that, you know, like a security deposit, if you were to leave early or if you were to cause damages or something, this would be held against your last paycheck if you do not continue your contract for the 3 years or whatever it is that we decide is fair. Because in the long run, we are putting out $250 to invest in you because we want you to come and work here, not because we want to, provide you a certification so you can go work somewhere else. And we do need to protect our investment as well. So I'm not sure, is there legally a problem with putting that in a contract to say, we want to do this for you and we are committed, but if you can't stay for 3 years, that is going to be deducted out of the...
Certainly that could be done.
Yeah, it's something we can discuss, whether you want to do it directly related to the budget or like in another meeting about transportation. I know you can have like a clawback provision to try to get those back, but one of the points that Mr. Nieder made is that you have to balance that against the cost of the legal action, the cost of a collection agency, or anything like that. If you could get it before last paycheck, that could be a way to do it. But like, if they got their last paycheck and then they left, what would you do? So I think there's some policy issues, but I think it's something that we could talk about.
We would be glad to look at it.
Yeah.
But as you said, Chair Haggerty, perhaps independent of...
Mr.
I was
Hershey?
just going to suggest we bring this to facilities in July and we can have a discussion on it, because we're going to have a transportation discussion undoubtedly in July. And so we can talk about it then, because I don't think it directly impacts this budget.
Okay.
Very quick, I just wanted to acknowledge that, the CDL thing, that was done by this board. We worked with staff, to try to, remove some of those barriers and make the job somewhat more appealing to applicants. So it's tough. I agree with everybody at the table, and I don't like it either that we provide this and they're
I
able
feel
to...
like it's only appealing to people who want to take it and bail. So,
Well,
Go ahead, Ms. Mahaffey.
I also hope that as we move to biweekly pay for our hourly employees, that this will help, because they're not only getting these classes and there's a long lead up to it, but then they have to wait an additional month. So that's sometimes 6-8 weeks where you're not getting a paycheck because you haven't been a district employee. So I'm hopeful that maybe that number will go down, but we'll see.
There's a lot of different options we could explore with it, but if Mr. Hershey's willing to put it on facilities, then let's bring it up then. I think we all have comments. I think we could back on it. Yeah. All right. Number 6.
There was a request to provide the history of the funding request for county appropriation and what was actually funded. So the chart we provided shows the superintendent's proposed budget, the county appropriation recommended to be requested back to 2007-8, and then it shows the Board of Education's request for county appropriation those same years, and then what the county actually approved for Wake County School System, and a difference. So you'll see the final increase in dollars each year, and you'll also see what those percent changes were each year. Question 7.
7?
Do you have a question?
No, I just saying number 7. Go on.
What are funds for mentors being allocated from? Mentor pay is paid from the district's Title II funds. Mentors of beginning teachers in their first and second years receive $50 per month, and are eligible to receive an additional $50 per month if they mentor a first or second year teacher. During the 23-24 year, we paid 1,289 stipends to mentors in the fall and expect to pay 1,368 stipends this spring. We do not currently pay mentors of beginning teachers in their third year. The funding request that was originally submitted sought to pay for mentors in their third year, but that's not included in the proposed budget.
Number 8.
How much do we pay our summer program teachers for their summer school roles? So both in our Read to Achieve summer school, our career and technical education summer program, and our summer high school credit recovery, we pay teachers their daily rate of pay. At this time, we don't know the exact number of teachers. It depends on the participants. But in 2022, we employed 353 teachers for the Read to Achieve camp and 293 teachers in 2023. And then we've shown a chart of the ratio of staff depending on how many students participate. Question 9.
Hold on.
I apologize because I've asked you this before and you've answered it. Is that state funded or no? The Read to Achieve camps?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to write it down on a big sticky hand. Thank you.
Ms. Profit, do you have one or no?
I forgot it, so.
Okay. We'll go on. If it comes back to you, just let me know. Number 9.
We're currently allocating monies toward more learning labs or the extended learning. And in the budget, that would be a cost of about $2.5 million for local funding. So here's some data about the number of students being served. Currently, with 82% of our schools reporting, there are 7,380 students in the expanded supervision during the morning and 11,747 students in the afternoon. Several schools have more than 100 students requiring supervision in the afternoon, which is the most challenging time for our staff and our students. The superintendent chiefs and area superintendents have discussed that the expanded supervision needs to remain a budget priority for schools in 24-25. Otherwise, our assistant principals and staff will have to supervise students beyond the regular school day without compensation. In addition, assistant principals and teachers and staff will not be available for critical duties and responsibilities such as staff, PLC, IEP meetings, etc.
And I would just point out, it was not included in the response, that it would be exempt, and I'll explain what exempt means. Exempt staff that would be required to supervise, because non-exempt staff are subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act and would have to either receive overpay if they exceed 40 hours, time and a half, or receive comp time, which has a price with it as well. So the exempt staff would include our teachers, our school administrators.
Okay.
Question.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Hershey.
And so is this really a transportation issue that we're just not getting kids home fast enough, or?
I would say it's a result of not having enough bus drivers ultimately. And therefore, certain routes are having to be covered by a bus picking up kids at a school, taking them, and then the bus circling back potentially to that same school. And therefore, they're not our target, and Mr. Strickland, correct me if I'm wrong, our target in the afternoon is to have the campuses cleared within 30 minutes of the afternoon bell with transportation.
But it's typically longer than that.
And this was initially put into place this year for the first time using federal pandemic relief funds to recognize that and to provide pay to non-exempt staff so teachers can get to their planning, we know, and school leaders can work with their respective teams.
Go ahead.
And there's no way to take 2.5 million to use as incentives for people that work at schools to help get their CDLs and get kids home? Because it is I know it's unlikely, but I'm just going to ask.
I would defer that to Mr. Strickland.
So if you remember last year, maybe the year before, we reached out to schools, all hands on deck, to see if we could identify potential staff that would want to drive in the mornings or the afternoons. We got a few, but it was not very successful. The dilemma that we have, as I see it, is that while I agree with you that money could be used for better purposes, until we can change things up a little bit, get more bus drivers on the road and reduce that reliance on those after-school programs, it's just going to take a while to change that dynamic.
But you see it, the chicken and egg of it, right?
Right. Yes.
If the issue is you're saying we have to have a program to provide supervision because we don't have enough of these bus driving positions filled, and we have all of this money that we could use to fill those positions, then maybe we wouldn't have the need for the additional supervision on the back end. So I mean, philosophically, I know one doesn't solve the other because we ended up in this position, but you can see why it's, for us, if we're trying to address the root cause rather than the symptoms of the cause, there's going to be some exploration of that. I know some other board members have questions about this one too, but I had this question. How is it that a late bus, a late arrival, getting a child late to school is going to require additional supervision?
It's not the late, it's the early.
It's
So
the
in
early.
the mornings, we have to get them there earlier than we
Okay.
normally would. So it's the early in the mornings and the late in the afternoons.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Go ahead, Mr. Hershey.
I was going to say, does this, if we're going to be spending this kind of money, and I brought this up about bell schedules and examining, do we need to modify some of the bell schedules to go to, I know you don't like to hear fourth tier, but if it saves $2.5 million because we adjust bell schedules and staff is not there as long, or some schools start a little earlier, I mean, it is a lot of money, and it's going to add up because if it stays this year, it's going to be there next year probably and the year after, and at some point, we're not addressing,
The root cause.
yeah.
So I think as a board, you all have explored kind of the diminishing returns as you increase the bail schedules, and that's going to create some dissatisfaction as well, as I understand it. With this particular funding, this didn't exist this year, and so the idea that you take $2.5 million and use that for compensation, be it for drivers or whatever the case may be, that's certainly something that I think you should consider and consider strongly. I mean, we actually thought about it and tried to understand what is it that's going to better help the schools in this situation. So what that means is that if, as a board, you decide you want to take this $2.5 million and put it somewhere else, those students will be supervised. That's what they've done before this year. That will be the exempt staff that David talked about. We certainly know that's going to put a strain on some things, but that will force schools and principals to think about what kind of rotational schedule do we need to put in place to make sure these students are covered. And so absolutely you can use it towards driver compensation or any other area, but we were trying to think about what might help support the schools knowing that the numbers are like this.
We have several additional questions. We'll go Ms. Mahaffey, then Ms. Caulfield, then Dr. Ing, then Mr. Swanson.
So I fully acknowledge that this is a parking lot for facilities question, but I do want to ask it while Mr. Strickland is here. I know this has been brought up in years previous, but have we ever explored part-time, afternoon-only, or morning-only bus drivers to help so we can at least get kids home, or if there's retirees that can only do the morning, or maybe they only want to do from 2
We
to
cast a
5?
wide net
Okay.
and offered, we need bus drivers. If you can only drive in the morning, we'll take that. If you can only drive in the afternoon, we'll take that. So that net has been cast. We just had not been successful in getting those part-time people to help us.
But that has been something that I know was, some places have done. I know, Mr. Strickland, you talked to looking at some municipalities that might have drivers on different shifts and seeing if some of them could be available. But I think for this conversation that Mr. Hershey's promising we'll have in later this summer, I'd like to see this topic come back up on that again. Ms. Caulfield, then Dr. Ing, then Mr. Swanson.
So I noticed that we have a considerable amount of more kids in the PM than in the AM. I'm assuming that it's the repeat kids, that there's the same location, same bus routes that we're having trouble with?
Most of the time, most likely, yes.
Do we know how many schools this is narrowed down to? I mean, it's not at every school, right?
It's not. I thought that information may be.
Just as several schools
Jack,
have
I'm
over
looking at you.
100.
Do you know? You have a clue how many schools?
It's the majority of
Is
them.
it?
I will pull that document. I've provided it to see exactly how many. The numbers that you have now, those reflect on an 82% reporting when I actually sent this data to Mr. Meter. But I will check for you. But it is the majority of the schools. And I'll check Mr. Strickland just a minute.
Okay, and I know that we had spoken about this in one of the past meetings, but are we doing or getting back surveys that are telling us more the direction of what our barriers are? I mean, I know you guys are trying, I know the attempts are out there.
And we're recruiting hard.
Right.
I think one of the things that came back recently was the twice monthly pay, from the information that we got back from not only the bus drivers, but the other classified staff as well. With that being in the works, I know there is some talk or discussion about that coming at some point in time in the future. We meet every 2 weeks to talk about the advertising efforts, the recruitment efforts that are continuously going on, and they have been since last summer.
And if I could add, Mr. Strickland, when he said we are, that includes folks from transportation, from communications, from human resources, from budget, finance, we're probably leaving somebody out, but it's a cross-functional team of leadership in central office.
Okay. It just seems like there's got to be a missing piece. It's a Wake County, we're one of the largest systems, there's a good place to go. So as we're sitting here discussing budget, and we know the 2 times would help them, we know the budget would help them, we're comparing ourselves to other companies and everything like that, I think it's something we need to consider. And it's also adding a lot to our children. They're sitting on the bus longer, they're sitting there waiting when they could be doing homework. I know we have people there that are helping them, but it's really not like one-on-one getting it done. And kids get burnt out. We get burnt out. So it's frustrating that from all this time, we're still not getting there. So I feel like there are a couple of boxes that we really need to prioritize. And it sounds like the pay and the 2 times is something that would really make a significant difference as we're exploring budget options.
I think Ms. Ellis had a comment.
Ms. Ellis?
Just to follow up, 161 schools are represented in those totals.
Thank you. Dr. A?
So I noticed that there was a terminology change from learning lab to expanded supervision, and it kind of makes me question the educational value of this program. If we're not actually learning in that period of time, are we actually using that money wisely? And then we mentioned about all hands on deck. Is there any kind of possibility of extending the all hands on deck to outside of that particular school, meaning bringing other employees of Wake County Public School to be all hands on deck in the school?
So we reached out to CNS staff, we reached out to maintenance staff, many of them who may already have their CDL, and did not get anything.
No, I'm not talking about the transportation. I'm talking about being there to help supervise the kids after school or before school.
Now, we haven't reached out as far as I know, but when I think about 161 schools that are represented, you think about 198, that if that was an effort to try and get district staff to cover all of those different schools, I don't know what that impact would be or if it would be effective. You could have a school that has 30 kids that need to be supervised. And so to have a maintenance person to stop what they're doing and come and help in that effort, that's also going to delay some of the work that they may be doing. So we can certainly go back and talk to the partners to see what that would look like. But that would be, in my opinion, the main reason why that hasn't been approached. But doesn't mean that you can't.
I think about the fact that, we talked about how our staff here in the central office should be more understanding of what's going on in the trenches. And what better way to do that is if they spend maybe, half a day or during that time that we're doing the expanded supervision for the staff to understand what the principals and assistant principals are going through in the trenches. It's just bringing it out there, and I know it may not be popular for many people, but that is something that if we're talking about stretching the principals and APs too thin, maybe we need to be all hands on deck. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ng. Still have several people with additional comments or questions. Mr. Swanson?
Well, I know I'd say at the table the $2.5 million I would like to see go into bus drivers. That's going to be the root cause of increasing pay. But now here, understanding there's 160 schools that are now being affected. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. And I just, yeah. I know this is a very tough budget that we're going through, and I think eliminating this would then put the burdens back on principals. But I guess this is an opportunity for us to maybe explore what a public-private partnership. I mentioned that to Ms. Johnson-Hostler yesterday about this, is engaging some of these YMCAs to see how we can be innovative, because at some point, I don't see us keep investing $2.5 million into this for the next couple of years. We have to think of something, and we must do something differently besides this piece. So I'm not going to belabor the point. I'm still struggling. What to do with this? Because I do believe that this is money that we could spend elsewhere. But I'll leave it as that.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Ms. Rice?
Thank you all so much. I'm just going to be very brief. One of my questions is, where are we advertising? I know we throw broad nets, but I'm curious to particularly where are we advertising, because if we're trying to find drivers and Wake County has over 900, we have over 1 million residents now. So of 1 million residents, we can't even get 2% that need a job. We're looking at unemployment. How and where are we advertising? Are we even advertising directly or consistently to the unemployment office?
So our recruitment marketing campaigns are something that I'm super proud of. The team has worked really hard. The team collaboratively across all of our divisions have worked really hard on this. We actually do a pretty sophisticated campaign. We partner with an agency who specializes with large corporations. They're not a local agency, they're an agency out of state that does this for very large organizations, and they do a mix of what's really, you all might be familiar with retargeting campaigns. So here's what a retargeting campaign is. Imagine you are somebody who's searching for a mattress. And the agency knows what type of person you are, what your demographic is, where you live, what your age is, because the computer tells you that, what sort of things you might be looking for. My bed is squeaky, something like that. We pull all of those demographics, we pull all of those possible keywords that somebody could be using, all of those factors that let us know you were looking at a CDL, you just moved into the area, and throws campaigns at you in your email, on your Facebook, on your Instagram, in your Google searches. And then we do retargeting, which means once you're in, and you're going to hear about that job opportunity every chance you get. We have done that pretty consistently all year. This has been one of our strongest campaigns, and we're going to move forward with that same data. So you all noticed we spent a lot of time this last year taking those campaigns, redoing the landing pages for them, how you get that information, really simplifying and removing the barriers for you to be able to apply. So starting this summer, we'll take all of those efforts and then start doing even more efforts on them, because what we've been doing is creating a database of all of those people who possibly could be interested, possibly have applied in the past, have retired, and then we're going to go back towards those folks and do even more targeting campaigns. Add that to transportation, or HR has now added staff people whose only job it is, as soon as you apply, to call you and now sell you into that job. Make sure you understand what the benefits are, make sure you understand what the opportunity is, what you need to do in order to be able to apply, really kind of promote that position. I will say I will hold those marketing campaigns amongst anyone else in the state. I also don't like talking about it publicly because we're competing against all of the other school districts in the area, so I try to say it on the side. But when I say I don't know that there's a stone that we have not unturned, like we have pulled every effort into it. The last piece that we will do, and I'm looking at Sarah to see if she can give me a target date, but we've commissioned a market research firm, we're working with Data and Accountability, to now take all of those folks who have resigned in the past 2 years and do focus groups and studies with those folks, because that's really, right, it's the churn to figure out, give us some very solid data so that we can understand why you left. Why did you go through this process, get your CEL and never show up? And why did you work for 4 or 5 months and then leave? We've done studies before, so we have a good idea of what it's going to say, but what we're going to do is give everybody a definitive answer and say, those 200 people that left in the last 2 years, 200 in the last 2 years, give us exactly the reason. Was it money? What did you leave for? How much is that person paying you? What are those job conditions like, and how do they differ from this job opportunity?
Thank you.
And yes, we're also putting flyers up everywhere.
Yeah, so with all of that, at the end of the day, we still are not getting a response to what we need to meet our needs. And it sounds like we have a very robust campaign that is very intensive, but in reality, it's not yielding us what we need. So again, sometimes things can be simplified and maybe possibly yield. I don't know the data and all of that collection, because currently right now it's not working. So we have to do something different, and it might not be as innovative as what we're doing. I think long-term, the things that I'm hearing sounds great, I think, to be helpful and to work, but I'm concerned about maybe, I don't know, some flyers and some simplified stuff, like, are people, what about, sometimes it's good old-fashioned basic things, like who's sitting at the place where people need the jobs the most with Wake County School sign and sitting there and actively recruiting people who are coming into an office that specifically are looking for a job to fix and help their family. And I'm just saying that, for right now, I don't know what that looks like, how it's been done. I think we're looking at more sophisticated, computer tech savvy ways of people that submitted applications and all of that, and hiring people who do it on a national level. But right now we're local. Right now we're North Carolina. Right now we're Wake County. Right? We need something that's a little bit, that's helping. And the last thing that I'm concerned with is the buses and my special education children.
So, reality check for everybody. It is 3:51. We're on page 3. And so what I'd like to do now is change how we're proceeding. And so we're going to let Ms. Kimsey go through all of the questions, and then we will open up for questions after she has finished the document. There are 38 pages in the document, but 9 of them are main questions. The rest are charts and agendas and addendum. So unless anyone has an objection, I'd like to get through the whole list, and then we'll reopen up for questions. Ms. Kimsey?
Okay, question 10 is asking about the behavioral support information in the budget. So we refer you back to page 112 of the superintendent's proposed budget. And in the response, we've pasted the chart, and it shows the positions that are currently paid on ESSER that we're recommending be moved to local. Counselors, social workers, psychologists, instructional specialists, senior administrators, lead psychologists, crisis specialists, and CEPL coaches. And also a few of those positions that are paid on our Medicaid funding, senior directors, and instructional specialists. All of these people work with behavioral health supports. So these are current positions that we are requesting moved to local funding. Question 11 is asking about some of the positions that are in the superintendent's budget to add to human resources, a senior administrator performance concerns and relations, and a senior administrator for talent acquisition. The district has one senior administrator for performance concerns and employee relations for the entire district. This one person provides guidance to all principals and other supervisors who are working with employees through performance concerns. A second position would allow the district to provide more timely support to our supervisors and employees. Senior administrators in talent acquisition work directly with principals and assistant principals to review and approve hiring recommendations. Each staffing administrator serves over 20 schools. Since 2015-16, we've added 26 schools, and since 2019-20, we've seen a 32% increase in transactions without adding any additional staff. An additional senior administrator would allow this team to provide more timely support to principals and other hiring managers and more efficiently review and approve new hires and staffing changes. Question 12 is asking about when would we get more information on success coaches in the budget. The 24-25 budget does not include an additional position for leadership coach. Currently, we have 4 positions that are paid from Title II. An additional position was allocated in March and will be effective July 1. So in total, we have 5 of the ELC positions in the budget. Question 13 is asking about the percentage breakdowns between state, local, and federal in the budget. And when we look back, this looks back periodically at some random years from current back to 2004-05. And you'll see those percentages. In the superintendent's proposed budget, the percentages look a little different. We know that that will change once we have an approved state and federal budget and county budget. This just shows the percent breakdown in terms of those funding sources to the total. We did see some change during the pandemic when we received additional federal dollars at a time when the state and local was not declining. So there was a shift there. And now we're kind of moving back as the federal dollars come to a close, the one-time federal dollars, to see those comparisons. Question 14, can we get more clarification on the difference between professional development and required training hours for the Board of Education? Board members must fulfill the legal requirement to receive a minimum of 12 hours of training every 2 years. Training shall include but not be limited to public school law, public school finance, and duties and responsibilities of local boards of education. All board members must receive 2 hours of ethics education within 12 months after initial election or appointment to the office, and again within 12 months of each subsequent election or appointment to office. As for professional development, it depends on who is offering the training and how much it will cost, and which group is providing it. The cost is dependent on what is selected by each individual board member. The district pays professional development required training for board members. Question 15 is a concern that we must do more for our certified and non-certified pay. Staff has provided the board estimated local funding required for a 24-25 increase for classified staff to move to a minimum rate of $18 per hour, increase the certified supplement by 4.5%, and to increase teaching schedule steps 16 through the top by $25 a month. These are in Addendum 4 as items you might consider if you wanted to add something to the budget. Question 16 is asking for more information about page 113, which is also the social emotional support positions. There were sub-questions within this one. Is all of this early intervention? No, it is not early intervening. Is this all student services or special education? It is all student services. Did we always have Medicaid funding? Yes, the school system receives Medicaid reimbursements every year. The amount of funding may vary by year. The funding is used for positions, professional development, contracted services, supplies, etc. How many roles is this covering? So we've included that same chart again, showing the positions currently on ESSER and on Medicaid that we're recommending move to local dollars. How many schools receive these positions? All of our schools receive behavioral health support positions. The behavioral health support positions listed above are only those that are on ESSER or Medicaid funding. So those positions are part of the funding formulas that we provide to our schools. There are many other positions on state and local funding. All schools receive support in these areas. What's the difference between crisis specialists and CEPL coaches? Crisis specialists address a crisis, student or staff deaths within the buildings, coordinates mental health responses. The social emotional foundations for early learning coach positions provide behavioral support for kindergarten students in our schools. Would any of this section be a need or a want? Are we required to have them? We are not required to fund these positions above and beyond. However, the strategic plan has prioritized behavioral health based on behavior, social, emotional, and mental health needs that continue to be a priority and a need for our schools. Schools continue to express a need for increased and enhanced support to support the behavioral health needs of the students we serve. This case maintains current positions and does not include any new positions. Can you explain how senior administrators or directors may be listed twice? And I think they're listed twice because some are Medicaid and some are ESSER. Question 17, can we evaluate the classroom necessary devices and then switch to request per need basis for any devices that families need? And this is addressing technology. We're currently in the process of developing a sustainable digital equity strategy in collaboration with our academics team. This involves seeking feedback from school leaders and teachers. Our goal is to make sure every student has access to instructional resources when needed. As part of the plan, there are several options being reviewed and evaluated. One of the options would be assigning a device to every classroom in grades K2 and every student in 312. While some students may choose to use personal devices, we can only guarantee universal access to all resources and content through district-assigned devices. In assigning devices to classrooms, the number of the devices would need to be equal to or greater than the maximum number of students assigned to that space during the day to accommodate fluctuations in attendance and enrollment. Devices must be assigned to classrooms 100% of the time, even though classrooms are typically only used 75% of the time. In all cases, we require a stock of devices to account for changing needs, such as breakage, new enrollments, and service wait times. Question 18, can we include, this was the page that showed comparisons of Wake County school system to other districts in the state and across the nation. And we provided an answer last work session explaining that data, and the question is, can that be in the board's budget? And yes, we intend to put that page revised into the board's budget. Question 19, how are coaches funded for new sports, for example, women's flag football? The women's flag football coaches were grant funded this year through the Carolina Panthers. When new sports are added, the district must identify funding from the current budget or submit a funding request as part of the budget process. There was a business case proposed to add additional extra duty positions for next year, and that included flag football. However, that business case did not make it into the superintendent's proposed budget. There are no funds in the superintendent's proposed budget for flag football. Question 20, Dr. Tracy Taylor raised concerns about school safety. Our yearly funding for security projects is included in the capital improvement program, which the county funds separately. On an annual basis, our security projects budget is about $5 million per year. Do we have information on how many central staff members are working remotely? Many central departments have no staff working remotely. The remaining departments primarily have a portion of their staff working remotely on a hybrid basis, either 1 or 2 days remote per week. Which of the 3 Crossroads buildings has the fewest employees? Utilizing funds from the lease for compensation could be advantageous. Is it possible for employees to share office space? We currently lease all of the Crossroads 1 and 2 buildings and a portion of Crossroads 3. Crossroads 3 also has a large percentage of its space dedicated for professional development. Wake County School System is in a multi-year lease with the owners of the building. What would the cost be if we only allocated building subs to our high-need schools? So we provided some information in the answer, and we're trying to still communicate that if we decrease any of the building substitute positions, we still have to backfill with substitute money, because decreasing the positions doesn't change the fact that the classrooms don't have a teacher that day. So we provided some options in the answer. The superintendent chiefs and area superintendents have discussed that the current funding formula of allocating one building sub per school should remain a priority for 24-25. During 24-25, staff plan to create a funding formula to more equitably distribute the resources to support schools with the high needs for 25-26. But to give you some data, if we were to give building substitutes only to our high needs schools, that would be 71 schools that would receive a building substitutes, but we would have to backfill and add substitute money for regular subs for the other 126 schools. And then we provided similar data for Title I schools only, low-performing schools only, or restart schools only. Question 24, how many technology positions do we need versus how many do we want in this budget cycle? We want to clarify that there are no new instructional support technicians requested in the superintendent's proposed budget. This is one of the 4 priority areas that we've had to pause because we are moving off one-time federal dollars. We've added 408 months of employment, or 34 positions in the last 4 years. We did not add any new positions this year, and there are no new positions in the proposed budget for next year because of the pause. We currently plan to request an additional 240 months, or 20 positions, in 25-26 and 26-27. Question 25. What would be the cost for Narcan in all schools? And this is the one we had the typo on. A presentation was made to the board in February. The presentation included a range of estimated costs. The upper end of that estimated range was $35,000. There's no additional funding being requested in the current proposed budget for this. Staff is looking at an alternative funding option. Question about changes to student IDs to include mental health and additional information. While it's true that not every high school provides ID cards to its students, it's noteworthy that only a select few, namely the North Wake College and Career Academy and the Wake Early College of Information and Biotechnology, mandate that these IDs be visibly worn during school hours. Despite this variation, incorporating mental health resources and supplementary information on the reverse side of a student ID ought to be feasible. It's important to recognize that decisions regarding the specifics of ID card requirements, as well as the financial aspects involved, are typically managed at each individual school. A question about the flag football coaching positions for the fall, assuming it's moving forward. A business case was submitted during budget for local funding for adding flag football coaches and other extra duty things to the schedule. The amount of the funding request was estimated to be $132,000. This business case was removed from consideration and is not included in the superintendent's proposed budget. I'm trying to gauge how many schools are using their building subs every day. Since building substitutes are assigned to the schools, we do not track their daily assignments like we do our daily substitutes. However, based on our substitute fill needs at the schools, we would say the vast majority of schools are using these positions daily. None of the schools have 100% substitute fill rate every day. And then we're down to item 27, which is the addendum we also provided last meeting that provides some information for you to consider as you consider options to adjust the budget. We've put some data in there to show you things that might be helpful while you're making your decisions.
Thank you, Ms. Kimsey. David Nader?
If I could just add one thing. 2 of the items that we did add to Addendum 3 were the option to increase non-certified staff to 1,750, and also the option to increase to 1,775. So that is now included in these options that the board can consider.
Thank you. All right, so now that we've made sure that we've hit everyone's question, because I didn't want you to have asked a question and not get it answered, we can open it up for more general questions. I want to set some more context for everybody. Mr. Nieder, again, what is the state deadline for submitting a budget to the county?
The board is required to submit a budget to the county commissioners by May 15th. The last currently scheduled board meeting prior to that is, I believe, May 7th.
That's correct.
And staff, while the board could call a special meeting for another budget discussion, staff would still need a few business days to take any final changes that the board directs to prepare it prior to May 15th.
Okay, thank you. We did start this budget process earlier than we have in the past. And one thing you'll note different from when we worked on all of this together last year is that there has been more information presented, more options. And if you haven't had a chance to fully look at it, if you go to page 35 or so in the document through 38, you'll see a lot of the questions or suggestions that people have asked and what the actual projected dollar impacts would be for either increasing compensation or not funding a particular program. So I know many of you individually, and I think collectively as a board, we've expressed interest in some changes from the superintendent's proposed budget. And I think we have a lot of the tools here in front of us that we could put something together. What I'd like to do in facilitating this discussion is really stress the urgency in coming up with a proposal that will get at least 5 of 9 votes, hopefully 9 of 9 votes, so that we can move forward before the deadline. All right. Obviously, we won't be discussing this in our board meeting tonight, but unless something is added, we would be discussing this at our May 7th meeting. So there's all sorts of, we can dig down very deep into many levels, but then there's just some bigger issues about just what do you feel about compensation? What do you feel about some of these specific programs, either added in the budget or ones that people might have had questions about? So kind of with that context, I'd like to open it up. I know, Mr. Swanson, you had some specific questions that we didn't get to back on extended learning labs. Did you want to go back to that or any other topic? I know Ms. Ellis stepped out.
Alice is not here, so I can wait.
Okay, all right. All right, so then with that, let me just throw it open. At our last work session, many board members expressed an interest in additional staff compensation. And if you remember, we had a multi-year plan that we had been working toward that had very specific, recommendations for how we might continue to increase teacher salaries, staff salaries year per year that we weren't able to fund in the superintendent's budget. Do board members have recommendations or feelings about staff compensation they'd like to bring to the table at this time? Ms. Caulfield?
I just wanted, I know that we kind of went through, and thank you for keeping that so fast and going through that. But to kind of back up to Ms. Rice's question that she was saying, I think that's a question that we're all kind of asking is why are we're putting out all these efforts, great efforts, Lisa, and your staff and everybody and facilities trying to do that. But if it's not producing the results, then we're missing something. And I mean, we have been told pay. We have been told twice, a month would help them because they do live paycheck to paycheck. I think these are things that we need to prioritize and move to the top of the list. Last year, we've already seen and heard, from facilities in our facilities meeting this past time, things arise, and they will. They always will. That's just, Murphy's Law, how it works. And last year, I'm not sure that we were exactly prepared. We did have some record high heats, and, we have some older buildings, so it's not to say it's somebody's fault, but it is definitely a challenge that we're facing, and I'm not sure that's going away, especially if we are short-staffed and we can't figure out how we're going to get more people on there. We're putting more strains on our children. For me, there was a spot where we talked about, obviously the YMCA, they've been a great partner for us for many different things. But in our item number 5, I believe it was, we were spending $1.1 million to go up to 20, or 1.1 million more to go to $20 an hour, which that could satisfy a lot of our pay issue versus 2.25 million just to put a Band-Aid on a problem that is still going to strain our system, our children, our families, and it's really not fixing the problem. If it was going towards a fix, then that's something. But where do we get the money to do these things? You know, I understand. I'm not for just keep asking more and more money and just keep padding at the top while we still keep crumbling at the bottom. So it's just a lot of Band-Aids. And I don't know, it's, when you get this list of, you know, all the different roles, and I can't say that I understand all the roles, so I'm still going through them and understanding there's a lot of positions that are repeated, and I don't fully understand, so I'll get more comprehension on that before I speak on that. But is it possible that we can consider the uncomfortable choice of making some cuts to put money where we need? It's not a want, it's a need, it's a priority to put our teachers, our HVAC, our facilities in the order we need to function regular. Like, that's just a normal. And I'm just throwing it out there. I think it's important consideration when I'm doing a budget at home or you're doing it in a business. Sometimes some things need to get cut in order to do what you need to do. And if we're constantly in this position, we need to look how we're doing it differently.
Thank you. And again, I really appreciate what staff has put out here, because they do identify, like, what are those real needs, the things that are mandated that we have to do, versus some things that were more optional. So, you know, we know that we have more needs than we can fund. I think everybody around this table agrees with that. So then it's a matter of how we prioritize. And so there were a lot of great and worthwhile programs the superintendent in his proposed budget did not choose to fund. And if we want to go back and try to fund some of those positions, particularly compensation, it means finding the money from somewhere else. And that could be some other cuts. That could be some new programs that we've created that in our proposed budget, you know, we're proposing to continue, but maybe we have to scale those back, or, you know, put them off a year until we get through the ESSER transition, and then maybe we can revisit them. You know, I've been a big proponent in a lot of these conversations for our building subs. I think this was something innovative that we did. I thought it provided a lot of direct relief to our teachers. I thought it was a very good program for preserving planning time and giving them their time during the day, where they don't have to come in and, like, you know, cover for a class. And I want to see that covered. But at the same time, I know that if our staff says the number one issue that they're facing is compensation, and if our efforts to find and fill these bus driver positions are not succeeding despite all the innovative work we're putting into it, then compensation is probably an issue. And if that means taking a program that I really like and value, like those building subs, and scaling it back, delaying it, pushing it off a year, I mean, that's a tough choice that I'd have to make, right? Because I can look at the budget savings and say that's money that we could put toward compensation. The same thing with the learning labs, right, or extended learning. To Dr. Ng's point, you know, if you remember when we developed that program, one of the concerns was that students were missing instructional time. And how would we make up that instructional time? And so that's why it was called a learning lab as opposed to just extended care. But what we've seen, I think, is that it's not like clockwork. We don't know that every route is going to run 20 minutes or 40 minutes late, but it can vary day by day. And so how do you plan lesson plans around, you're going to have that kid for 10 minutes, you're going to have that kid for 40 minutes, you know? And so the idea that we're able to use that for instruction, I think, has been really, really challenged. And so I think several of you have talked about, if we're spending that much money to treat a symptom, I think this is Ms. Rice's point, why don't you look at addressing the cause? And other people have made that same point too. So I'm just throwing this out, not as a specific recommendation, but to really try to push all of us toward, if we want to propose an alternative to the superintendent's budget, and we need to bring it to the board table by May 7th, we need to kind of come together and figure out what it is that collectively we're willing to move or change to hit those goals. So, Mr. Hershey?
So I'll start with some proposed changes. I'm going to do some small ticket items first that I have emailed to most of you already. I don't really like when we get presentations and then they're good ideas and then we say, well, how are we going to find money for them? And I'm not real happy that we did this fantastic flag football program. It was extremely popular. We have a promise in some way to to all the girls that played, and then we're like, that's kind of it. So for three small, actually, and I'm going to bring up a fourth item in this. It's 4 small ticket items. I would propose undoing the student parking cut. For me, that would fund the flag football coaches, the Narcan in every school, which I would prioritize that as the top of my list. And doing what did I have? Oh, and by the way, it kind of blows my mind that we don't have one ID that is standard across all schools. Did not know that. I mean, I assume all of our IDs were pretty standard. So I would actually encourage a change in that, but that is for another discussion. But if we are going to add additional mental health information on the back of those, if we need funding, that we have a funding source. And then the 4th small ticket item, and the board members may know, I was planning on bringing this up at the board table, but we got a presentation earlier in student achievement about engaging families and making sure we have resources to get families to schools, after school programs. We had the issue at Brute where we took away, for valid reasons, they could no longer use a bus to go get families. It took a very long time to get information to Brute. I am very unhappy about the lack of communication. I'm going to save that for the board table. But there's a question of a funding source for them. And for schools where we bus students to schools, we're not providing any funding to help them get transportation to pick families up. I think that is a mistake. And I think undoing the parking cut funds all 4 of those. So it would not be asking for any additional funds. I can prioritize those if people need me to, but that would be something I am proposing. I'm also don't have a problem proposing that we take some of the extended learning money and use it towards bus driver compensation. I don't know how much. I'm open to a discussion there. I was wondering if when we checked to see if schools had anyone who would drive, if we offered, along with that ask, if we offered a bonus, because you can do some quick math about how quickly $2.5 million can be spread around 160 schools or however many schools need it, and you get $15,000 or so. And those can be some nice bonuses for staff to drive kids home in the afternoon, that sort of thing. So I don't know if we make the ask of that dollar amount and then we decide later how to use it. I'm okay with that approach, but I'm not necessarily sure it is automatic to extended learning versus let's use it to actually get kids home instead of keeping them at school longer. So that's kind of, David clarified something for me earlier in the charts where it talked about the ESSER funding and the months of employment. Thank you for clarifying that. The vacant positions are not being asked to be funded. It's only the MOEs, it was confusing because I thought with the months of employment and then the vacant was taking that months of employment and subtracting the vacant, and that was, but I see how it is now. So we are not asking, so in case anyone's wondering, we are not asking for any funding for those vacant hours at this point, because that was going to be my cost savings. Darn.
Yeah, those lapsed salaries go a long way for a lot of other purposes. All right, Ms. Rice.
Again, thank everybody for working hard on the budget. But my question is, for me, I guess it's not even a question, but I submitted a comment or a request late, so staff wasn't able to address that yet, and we've spoken. But for me to better understand how to ask for something more specific, I need a better understanding of its function and allocation of these categories. Look very impressive, and there's a nice big size number that goes with it. That's not telling me what's in it. And so for me to come in and even share a little bit about, how has Sam just explained, hey, let's take this amount and we don't have to change this and that. I need a little bit more detail and transparency in this budget in order to make these tough choices and decisions. And so I don't know about how my other colleagues feel, but for me, I can't make these hard choices without really knowing what those categories have within them to come up with this dollar amount. And I'm sure that there has to be numbers that the staff has that came up with the dollar amount in the first place. So what's the meat, within the category, so that we know best to, where it makes sense. Some things we know we can't cut because of, our legal requirements, but there are things that we can. But how do we effectively know what to do if you don't really know what that is within that category? And so for me, I need to know more about what's in the category. How do we, I think, I'm belaboring the point, but I think we get it. But that's what I need to be able to do this and say, hey, can we shift this and this, do that, in order for me to effectively say, no, I prefer that we can decrease this program or do that. And I know we have to make those hard choices, and I'm okay with that based off our last conversation of this is the dollar amount that we know that we have. We can't really ask county, we could, but we're being reasonable and logical. Ask them more than what we have, but we need to do it with all knowledge and understanding, so that when our constituents ask us why, we can share why in confidence and advocate for our staff, to do what it needs to be done. And then for me, academically, I'm really focused on two things: taking care of staff to do their jobs effectively. But I'm more concerned about, even if I pay staff more to do their job, I need a different outcome. And I know that's very, very blatant, that's very blunt. I need people to be able to do their job as effective as possible, which means there's certain levels of training that should be happening that will really save us money if we knew how to do things equitably. People keep thinking that DEI and these things are going to cost, they're not helping, but it doesn't help if we don't use it effectively and put it in every aspect of what we do. It will save us more money on the back end if we do what needs to be done on the front end. And if we're making it options for our teachers to be trained in certain ways so that we can utilize the funding that we're doing, then that's a problem. Because we're losing money and we're not using our dollars effectively to help everybody to level the playing field and provide the resources where we need it. And so I have a problem with that because it hurts our academic education and performance. We're talking about let's get to the root. Let's get to the root. Let's talk about the root. Equity is the root. Racism is the root. Let's talk about it. It's not taboo and it's not a bad four-letter word. It's our society. It's our truth. We are a diverse system. We are a large system. Let's talk about the root causes of how it affects our dollar amount and bottom line if we don't do certain things. And if we don't create a level of operational standards versus school-based work. We have to have operational standards across the district, and we have to look at a deeper dive within that, which will affect our budgets and bottom line on the end. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. Mr. Swanson, did you?
It's going to be really short.
All right.
I'm going to still stay on the two proposals that I threw out last time. The learning labs, and looking at how we can prioritize some of these schools for the learning labs. Those are the two that I'm proposing to get us to at least the 1775 or the 1750.
For the subs or for learning labs, both?
Both.
Okay, I guess.
Yeah, I'm still putting the same table off.
Okay, and so that way you've identified potential reductions and changes, but you've also given the targets for what you're working toward too.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
So
Dr.
just so I'm clear on that, 1775 at 4.1 million, right? Is that-
Yeah, we can get there. That is correct.
With looking at those two areas for reductions?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ing?
I mean, we know that, our school system is labor intensive, and majority of our cost is on the labor. And, I definitely don't want to sacrifice the education of our kids. But, looking at where we can cut, I mean, do we have to cut some jobs? Not the ones that are, affecting directly to the education of the kids, but other areas that are, if there is some kind of redundancy in the work of the positions. Ms. Rice, you talked about, we don't know what the job descriptions or what that position does actually, and that makes it hard for us to know, how do we, split the baby, right? And it's hard for me to know, it's like how if I were to have the ability to cut a position, where do I cut it, and how do I make that difficult decision based on, what they do and how effectively they are doing their job and things like that. And, I certainly don't want to micromanage, this whole endeavor. But I don't know where else I can find those dollar amounts to help with operational, effectiveness at the school level. That's my 2 cents.
If I can build on that, I know in several conversations that we've had around budget and staffing, Mr. Nieder, you've referred several times to a past market study report that the district had commissioned independently to look at salaries and positions competitive to other districts, and then I think also other agencies. Do we have any idea what something like that would cost to engage in the upcoming year?
The study itself, the last time a formal study was done was probably in the 2015-16 timeframe. And it's a one-time cost, obviously. And a guesstimate would be in the low $100,000 to $200,000 range to do the study. And we do have an RFP that is ready to go to get proposals for that study. That said, once the study is completed and we have better information about what it will take to compete with the market, that still will require then finding funding, either from additional funding or reducing or stopping doing something else that's just been discussed.
So if I understand you, if there's an RFP, then the district would be ready to fund that contract.
We would find funding in our existing budget.
Okay.
For that one time.
Great, thank you. Coming back around, Ms. Edmonds.
So can I?
Oh, please, I'm sorry,
address,
Dr. Taylor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, Dr. Ing, part of what I would recommend everybody do is look at page 2, and that will show you sort of the operating budget and where dollars are spent. And so there's always the possibility of reducing staff. I'll just never say that's something that you don't take off the table. But what I also have to stress is that when you make cuts to try and support something in the budget, the majority of those cuts are going to come at the school level because that's where the majority of your people are. And so, and that's not to say that maintenance, the central office, or whomever won't be involved in cuts, but even when you make those cuts at the district level, what you gain is so small that it doesn't allow you to fund those other things. And so that's why we're trying to do everything that we can to stay away from cuts. But that is absolutely a possibility that the board has, but we do recognize that the majority of that would impact schools if you decide to do something like that. Just wanted to share that.
Thank you. And I apologize, Ms. Edmonds.
No, I was actually going to refer to page 2 also. Based on the questions that I saw for today, I was getting the impression that folks were looking at central services and some of those salaries to make cuts. And so we just need to remember that, you know, DPI, for example, and I'm sure Dr. Taylor, you can speak to this, has been like cut in half over the last decade, and that has hindered their ability to help districts across the state. I know one department in particular was really gutted some years ago, not recently, but it was the actual department that helped the most underachieving schools. Well, they're not doing much better, you know, and that they were seeing results. They were actually getting good results. I think in Wake County Public School System, if we remove people from the technology department, that is going to impact students. That is going to impact educators. If we remove somebody from Dr. Ellis's team, that is going to impact schools. That is going to impact students and educators. So, you know, I'm as frustrated as everybody else that we need money that we're not going to get. And I don't mean that of the ask. I'm saying we really need more than what we're asking for, is what I'm saying. And so if we're very committed to funding that 4% for our educators, something's got to go. But we just need to be very mindful and vocal that there's names attached to those positions, and students and educators absolutely will be impacted even if they come out of this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Edmonds. Mr. Swanson?
And to that point, I think there's, you know, if it can't be added onto this budget, we have future budgets that we can build upon to get back to, you know, if we're looking to reimagine what the building subs look like, we can gradually add that on to different upcoming budgets to get us back to there. So I just wanted to add that point and agree with everything Ms. Edmonds just stated.
I actually do have, I'm sorry, I do have one more about a suggestion about where to fund some of these dollars. I think it's, question 23 is about substitutes. Was there, do we have, I'm trying to find it. My suggestion is to consider, in the superintendent's proposal, is to keep all of the support staff that we've got with ESSER dollars. And so I would like for us to talk about if we only keep those at perhaps our Title I schools or our schools that are struggling the most. So a reduction in that category, not an elimination.
And I want to be clear, you're talking about...
I'm not articulating it well. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure, is it the building sub-positions,
Nope.
the building sub, and the support?
Nope. The support counselors, social workers.
So you'd reduce it from all of them that are there to just the ones?
So the student dispositions and well-being on, you know, in Dr. Taylor's opening letter at 13.8 million, reducing that piece in order to raise the supplement.
Okay.
And reducing how, you know, making sure we keep those positions at our highest need schools.
Yeah,
And I'm nauseous to even suggest that.
I know. These are tough decisions, and that's one that, for me, even keeping them in the non-Title I schools, because we know even if a school's base population is a higher income, you know, I'm preaching to the
Absolutely.
choir.
Absolutely.
And so,
Yes.
for me, trying to save all of those student support positions is a big priority,
Yeah.
more than some others. But I appreciate you bringing that. I know that's not an easy recommendation to make.
It's not.
And so we'll look at the specific recommendations. What I'd like to do, and I don't want to cut off discussion, but just to give you an idea, and I said I'm coming to you, Ms. Coffin, I'm not cutting off discussion. But what I'd like to do is, after we finished our work session, synthesize all of these ideas, give them to the superintendent, and then have him bring back some options for us that include what some of these specific recommendations in their totality could look like, and then distribute those to us well in advance of our next meeting, so we have something like with real numbers to look at, and something that you can talk to each other about, so we're not just coming to the table for the first time and trying to come to a consensus, but rather give you all a chance to sort of, you know, discuss your individual priorities the best way that you think we could go forward. So I'm trying to solicit as many of those recommendations like we've been getting here now that I can. Ms. Caulfield?
Well, what I wanted to ask about that, are we, at the next board meeting, because we only have one more left before this is due, are we having a work session on this as well?
So that work session hasn't been set.
Okay.
So on one hand, we can definitely talk more about it in work session. On the other hand, if what we talk about requires more research or, you know, staff to get numbers that we don't have, then between obviously finishing the work session and walking across the hall, we wouldn't have time for the budget. So I think whether it's taking these options and bringing them back to the work session and then trying to get consensus there, that could be a good option. You know, the alternative would be trying to schedule like another date to meet.
I mean, because I appreciate that we brought it earlier this year, but we have only had two work sessions, which we had last time. We just kind of crunched it together real fast and swallowed it. So I think it's important because there is a lot of discussion, and I think it's good that we're actually diving a little bit deeper to see what we can do. And like Dr. Taylor has mentioned, this is not going to be an easy transition budget because of the difference in what we're getting. For me, well, one more question. Do you think that it would be possible or beneficial if we had a town hall for the bus drivers? Since that seems to be something that has been going on for almost a year now, that we're having this ongoing struggle, if we did something like that, would it be more beneficial to sit down and talk with them? Because we have done town halls for different reasons, and I feel that they're pretty productive. And maybe it's something that the board could put, I'm not saying today, you know, I'm just saying, just a food for thought to see if that could kind of bring them to the table, make them feel heard, and we understand and see where it is that they're coming from, that we're not getting people to fill these positions. You could advertise and have the greatest things in the world, but if we're not getting people to want to move on that, like, we need to understand where we're getting stopped, right?
To add to that, because I think I did not communicate clearly. We hired 100 bus drivers last year, a record number.
Right.
We lost 86. So our ad campaigns are working. We have a challenge with retention.
Right, and that's what I'm saying, is we need to understand what is the real problem that we're having here. But just a couple of other comments about the budget in general. There are certain programs, like you mentioned, that we're not going to be able to do certain things like subs. I think that's a great idea to have the subs because it's directly in our schools that affects our children directly. Helps program. Well, I understood they said last session that they were pretty confident that they could find I would like to see that we definitely have it because we know that definitely helped. I wouldn't want to cut out programs like that for our children that we know we absolutely need and could exacerbate our problems down the road. So that's why I keep saying I feel like they should move up to the top of the priority list.
Can you be, just for clarification, which ones, which programs?
Well, the subs, the helps, the mentors that we were trying to add, learning labs, this whole thing of where do we put the money effectively for it to be, like, I don't want to take
programs, new or old, out of the classrooms where it affects our children the most, and it affects our teachers the most. And I do believe that consistency is one thing that we talk about often, so having that consistency across the board does give us more effectiveness on what it is that we're trying to get done. But to some of the things that I'm going to say, because I don't know how else to say it, I'm trying to dance around it because I don't want to get anybody upset about it, but we look at a chart of what we have in our staff, and I understand that all of our central office and all the people in our SLT team are important and play a really good role in bringing all the information here. Obviously, we spend hours and hours every week talking about all this information. But if we have so much staff at the top, I mean, I don't understand these charts because sometimes, I mean, we have in some of these departments, we have senior administrators, there's like 6, 8, 5, 6 of them. Some of the directors, we have like, there's, 3, 4, and one of them we have 5 directors. I don't understand what the role or the need of that is. So when I'm talking about that, I'm just saying as a big business, as big as we are and we need to operate, these are pretty decent salaries, and I'm not sure that we need as many as we need, but we know that we need teachers. We know that we need HVAC and bus drivers, and if we have to make cuts somewhere, this is something that businesses all across the nation and the world have to sometimes make. So I can't understand this chart because I don't know. It's just a list of a whole bunch of positions. When I see that we have 18 senior administrators in one department, I'm like, what are all those people doing? I don't know. And it may be very valid, but it's hard for me to know if there is not some positions, and I don't think it's an all or nothing. I think sometimes we may have to figure out where we can cut from all different things, and at the end of the day, we wind up with a different pot of what we can do to help these people. So it's an uncomfortable thing to say, but I just want to know why that's not being discussed.
So, Dr. Taylor, did you want to address that? Or?
Yeah, so what I would say is that when you begin to look at those positions, it absolutely depends on what the department is. So take, for example, if there's the exceptional children's department and you see a high number of staff, those may actually be staff that support certain sections of schools or certain attendance areas. So think about your area that may have, hypothetically, 25 or 30 schools. And so the work that a specific group of people have to work in supporting the teachers that's done at the district level may happen when you have multiple groups like that. And so that's not to say that it's not something that we shouldn't look at or won't look at in the future. But remember that you're talking about 160,000 students. And so you're going to have a lot of situations where you have support staff at the district level that are specifically there to support those schools. And so we will certainly look closely at those kinds of things. And that's where I talk about the difference between the extra and the excess. And I think you're absolutely right. And where we are, well, I can tell you where I am in the budget phase in terms of arriving, there just hasn't been enough runway to be able to make those decisions effectively. But it's something that we certainly have to do. But a lot of that is support staff for schools because you have so many schools and so many students.
And I certainly don't want to lose anybody. I'm just saying that, we talked about this last year when they got, we gave out a 5.5% raise. That's a significant amount of money for all of these people that are salaried. When we can't even figure out how we're going to pay our teachers and keep them, and they come up to us one right after another, and they're constantly saying, I have 2 jobs, I have 3 jobs, I don't see my own children. It's a big deal.
It is, and if I can, I hear exactly what you're saying, but I'd like to give you another side of the coin for some context, which is, right now, if you asked me and let me pick on someone in the room. No, you're not. You're not senior enough. But
I was about to say
technology.
I'll pick on technology, or I'll pick on our chief information officer. Like, if you asked me what is the average starting salary for those positions in a comparable institution, either a state institution or like another government institution or a private institution, I couldn't tell you, right? I don't have like all of the context. And when you get to like a lot of our very specialized roles, say someone who's running our Office of Due Process, right, which you know from all of our due process hearings is a very important role. But I don't know myself, like, you could show me a number, but if I looked at someone with that educational background and that professional training, what they would make in Wake County versus what they might make in Mecklenburg County or Guilford County or in Atlanta or Richmond or Nashville. And at the same time, I don't know, like this is what we're seeing with teachers. They can take their 4-year degree and their master's degree and go to professions outside of teaching and make a whole lot of money. So oftentimes, like when we have these vacancies, is the vacancy, and one way we could look at a vacancy and say, well, we've gotten by without it for a long time, so maybe it's not essential. Or it might be that the vacancy is because we're not paying anywhere near, not offering a competitive wage. Now, before you came on the board, Mr. Strickland's position had been vacant for some time. And so we were relying on outside contractors and like part-time employees coming in to try to do these duties, and our maintenance and operations functions suffered because we couldn't pay someone with the professional skills and requirements for the job that Mr. Strickland had anywhere comparable to what someone could make in the private sector. And we see that with teachers, right? Like you can't get a CTE teacher to come in and teach electrical or skills, HVAC skills, because it's so much less than if they just perform their HVAC tasks. So I think for us to like take the budget ourselves, eyeball it and say, well, this is too high, this isn't high enough, we'd be operating in the dark until we had that kind of professional study. But I think that kind of professional study could tell us, are there redundancies, right? Do we have situations where functions are, maybe we have different departments doing duplicate functions, or maybe we have something where we're putting job duties on someone that maybe belongs somewhere else. And we might find savings where we could increase pay for positions where we're not able to get a competitive candidate and maybe right-size some other positions. But I think we have to have something, like you said, it can't just be that list with job titles. I think it has to be like an actual independent group coming in, evaluating it, and giving us that market study. And then if you had that as a tool, you could take a look and say, well, based on this, I'd recommend this kind of restructuring. Or based on this, I might, increase this position up or down. But I think until we have that, I think we're kind of operating in the dark.
And let me be clear, I was not speaking about any individual's salary.
Okay.
I was speaking about the amount of people that we have in each department versus we're running out of like teachers and HVAC that we're sending entire schools home because we can't get people out there, or parts, or we're not on our maintenance because we don't have enough people. What I'm saying is those are crisis modes that puts us in a tizzy. I'm not talking about that each individual person is not, that they're making too much. That's not what I meant at all. I meant we have some departments here that have a lot of people in it. Could we condense in this mode of crisis for all these other things to take from Peter to Paul as an option? And I'm not saying, cut everybody out either, because we need to function at a business level as well. I'm just saying, we keep saying, well, let's, not have this program, or let's not have the subs. No, we need those. We need those. We need those in the classroom. We can't cut those things out. So that might force us to cut in other areas. So I just want to be clear with that. I was not speaking about somebody's salary and whether it was worth it or not at all.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. I
Yeah.
misunderstood you. I saw Mr. Nieder wanted to add something, and then Dr. Taylor, and then I'll come to Mr. Swanson, and back to Mr. Hershey.
Yeah, I'd like to just share one additional thing. I shared a few minutes ago that I believe it was in the 2015 time frame, give or take a year or two, that a market study to offer competitive compensation levels was done, and there is an RFP that we're pulling together to conduct another study. What I've just heard, though, is really more of an organizational study or organizational audit that, again, would be a third party coming in, as you shared, looking at the central operation, determining if the structure is the best, or make recommendations, and also look at staffing levels. And I will share with the board that a study like that, an organizational audit of central services, was done, I believe, in 2012.
Yes, just before I came on the board.
And it was done, a new superintendent came in, Superintendent Tata, and he asked for that study to be done, and I'll leave it at that.
That's essentially what I was going to say, that I think you're absolutely right. Doing a study helps us not to operate in the dark. And what we're going to find is that it is the market that makes it difficult in terms of being able to attract people. And that study will show that HVAC people, for example, technicians, they're woefully under the market. But that's all I was going to say. That study would help us not operate in the dark.
Right. And I meant salary of the people who are on this chart, not like the HVAC. We know that they're kind of, under the market a little bit. We can't keep them coming in. But just having that, where can we make savings that we can actually put the money and redirect it towards what we need?
And I think that's what the study will show, and not to pick on any particular chiefs, but, if I think about our chief academic officer, she works in the largest district in the state. And I know a district 3 times smaller than us, salary is about the same.
Right. And that's what I meant. It's not the salary that I was thinking about. It's the amount of roles that we have. When we don't even have enough roles, when we have teachers who are covering other teachers or vacant teachers in their planning periods, that's really affecting our kids immediately, right? And that's crisis mode to me.
Mr. Swanson.
I agree with the large part that's been discussed, but I think it's also important to state that the state legislator is responsible for teacher salaries. We are doing our best at the local level to increase the supplement, and we cannot continue to disregard the lack of efforts that our state legislators are doing, because they're responsible for these crises that we're in. So what we're trying to do is to the saying, rob Peter to pay Paul, and our students are suffering because the state legislator is not doing their doggone jobs. And if you read the Constitution, and you will see that they have an obligation to ensure that every child has access to an education. And what they're doing and what they've done over the past decade is disrespectful to every educator, especially when you're seeing, I'm reminded of some conversation or a statement that Ms. Waters had stated, and I'm going to try my best to paraphrase, but it seems that education is the only profession in this country that has a price tag by folks who are not in the buildings every day. And that is the problem. So I think if we really want, and I'm glad we had to bring our legislators to school day, but I hope that some of those legislators could actually see the harm that they have caused and what these school leaders and teachers are doing every day to fill in the gaps, because they will not value and respect education the way they should. And I didn't teach any of those legislators, but if I did, I could assure you that I would have some Fs to give all of them, because they are failing not only the students, but their educators who invested and poured into them, and they should be doing the exact same thing. So I know that there's cuts that we're going to have to make, but I think the biggest piece, and for those that are listening, is email your state legislator and tell them in this short session to invest in teacher compensation, so we don't have to sit here and eliminate programs that we know are working to make sure that we can keep folks in the classroom. So I'm going to refrain from there before I start cursing, and it will not be best for all of us. So.
To it.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. We'll do Mr. Hershey and then Ms. Rice.
So just to piggyback on Mr. Swanson's point, I would encourage people to think about, if we spend $7 million for a 4% or 4.5% raise, whatever it is, how ultimately little that is per year. So if we gutted central services and cut $28 million worth of staff, like a few $100s more for teachers. And what we really need, to Mr. Swanson's point, is $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 raises coming from the state. There is no amount that we can cut and turn around and pay teachers or any staff at schools that will make up for what the state is not doing. I mean, we wouldn't have meetings here anymore because no one would be working here anymore. And it would just be board members coming in trying to figure out how to run. And so I understand what your point is. I think in the short term, two things. One, we had this same conversation last year, and I think we all want the studies to be done. So as soon as we can get that done, that's fantastic. But in the short term, if there's a way to give staffing levels from maybe the history of staffing levels over the last 15 years, because we've grown significantly in the number of schools, and I'm sure that staffing has not here always kept up with that, and maybe we can kind of start to show that, especially as it relates to the 2012 report that showed that we were very understaffed, that we'll see that we're not getting bloated in any way. I think that may be useful, but I guess the last thing is, I know this is probably not popular and won't go anywhere, but I actually would cut some of the learning lab for bus driver. I said that already, but then I would make an additional ask above what the superintendent did strictly for teacher pay, even if it's a small 1 or 2%. Because if we cut
The total ask.
Yeah, because if we cut the building subs, we're going to still pay for subs. So I don't know that we'd save any money.
They have that broken down in there.
How much was it?
So it's about a little, like 40%.
If principals had to call in to get a sub?
Yeah.
I asked for that question.
That's if they could get a sub too, which would be problematic.
Sure. But they do have it there, and they also broke it down by schools with higher needs.
Yeah, I saw that broken down. I know they love the building subs and they use them every single day, and I would try to, if there's any schools that don't need them, great, and by the way, that if teachers were paid properly, we wouldn't need building subs.
All right.
Well said.
Sorry.
Ms. Rice.
Thank you. I wanted to move forward with what Mr. Swanson was saying in reference to legislature and state. One of the key things that disturbs me is going back to our budget, 10% of it going out to our charter schools and vouchers. And so when we talk about legislation, I think that there is a tactful way for us as a district to stand up and say, we can't continue to do that in some way. I know I've seen our legislative agenda. I remember us talking about this in our board retreat. So that's something that's very important to me as well, that I think we as a district have to address. You don't necessarily have to be dogmatic about it, but it does need to be really understood. This is a challenge, and for us to continue to help educate our families around where a large chunk of sums of our money is going that could help with our teacher pay, but based on what we're doing, especially if there isn't a productive use around that charter voucher system. It's, because at the end of the day, we all know when people choose to do what they're going to do around private or particularly charter schools, they end up back in the district. And so that's money that we've lost. And so in families, I think these are just things that we just need to constantly verbally say and alert community about, that you think it's going to work, but you're not going to find the same processes. If you do have an issue within those school systems, that a board of maybe 6 to 12 people are going to make a decision. If a teacher doesn't do something right, and that's the end of it, be all of it, the kid can't come back into school, and then they're right back here with Wake schools. And so I know I don't sound to just belabor the point, but I think that it's a constant voice that has to be raised in education and helping parents understand what that looks like. And I think that our students, while we don't do we do the best we can as a district, and I know that we have some challenges and people send emails and their concerns, at least there's a process for your voice to be heard, and that we can come together even as a board in an appeal process for families' voices to be heard. You're not going to get that outside of the strong public education. And I just want to keep highlighting that, and I think we need to highlight that in our legislative agenda and stuff, that we can't do vouchers, we can't do charters. Is not effective for us and the overall well-being of public education.
You talk about that engagement. I've seen some private schools that the agreement is that you sign an NDA, and non-disparagement, right? So imagine if we had that and we never stand for it.
Again, equity.
Stand for it.
Right. Again, to me, it's about equity, and I think if I can help people, just for the sake of those listening, I need everyone to understand equity is not a bad word, and it's not always about race. There are other things that we talk about, and I think when people understand about inclusion and about diversity, it's not always about color. It is about other areas, socioeconomics, it's about disabilities. These are the things that are diversity and inclusion. And we have to be realistic about these things in people's lives, and it has nothing to do about your zip code, because these same disparities when it comes to being inclusive or having a diverse thought process or mindset is all needed to make a great system. And I think that we just got to constantly raise these voices to educate community that may not understand or have just one lens to know that's not a bad word, but it's a very helpful word.
I think that's well said. So what I'd like to do, unless anyone has like another specific recommendation that they want to put out on the table, what I'd like to do is ask Mr. Nieder and Ms. Kimsey and Superintendent Taylor, you've got the veto authority, so if you don't like the answer, you can come on in. But for consideration, right, for next steps, if we don't add another meeting, but if we come back to the work session on that first May meeting, could we have something where between now and then we've compiled and synthesized some of these ideas and then given us like a couple options, like an option A or an option B? If we're able to discuss those in work session prior to that meeting and then come to some consensus or agreement around the table, would we still be able to take that to that meeting that same night?
Yeah, I believe we could.
Yes, I believe, Mr. Harry, what you described is very doable. Assuming we, let's say, come up with 2 or 3 different options to address what we are hearing, or some of the common themes and common requests or suggestions. We could do that. If there's significant variance, it might not allow us to bring it back to you that same night. But if they're non-material changes, and Ms. Kimsey, I'd ask you to weigh in as well.
I think if there are options during the meeting and you make decisions on those, then you would be approving the amount that you were going to request from the county that evening, and that would give us time to revise the document and get it to the county in time. You know, we've heard several things on the building subs, whether that's not having any of them or which needs schools that you want, you know, those variations, if it could end up being several variations, because I didn't really hear a direct which one of those that we should bring back.
And we'll talk about that to give you some of that direction, and we can get more feedback from the board before that, but, yeah.
So that's what I was going to say. Based on what we've heard, we can certainly work with the chair and the vice chair to kind of craft what those, 3 or maybe 4 options are. And then when you give us a direction, we can share that, and you can certainly have thoughts about it before we even come back. And
then let me ask this. Would you all be amenable to maybe starting the work session a little early so we could have a longer gap between the end of the work session and the session, just to help staff put something together?
Sure.
Okay. Ms. Edmonds?
I would be agreeable to that, but the other thing I was going to say, I actually was hoping that we would have a special called board meeting to do another work session solely dedicated to the budget. I know it's very hard to get the 9 of us together, but we did that to develop the questions to ask the superintendent candidates. This seems worthy of us challenging ourselves to get together for some more time.
So I anticipated that there could be some interest in that. And I think what we all need to ask ourselves, and ask ourselves honestly, is, will we use that time productively and then actually come to a recommendation, right? Because, there's questions that we can ask where we can just go down deeper and deeper and deeper levels and still not have all of our questions answered. But if we think it's necessary, we do have, hold on, I think I saw it here. We have one of those months where we have, thank you, Ms. Allen, where we do have an additional Tuesday. So there is no board meeting scheduled for, and therefore no work session scheduled for Tuesday the 30th. We do have executive committee and we do have transfer appeals scheduled right now for that day. We could come in for a work session that day. That's still a Tuesday. That's a day that normally we reserve for board functions. Would you want an actual board meeting or just the work session? What are you proposing?
No, just a work session. And it would be, as for me, as I was thinking of it and suggesting it, it was exactly to come up with a proposal.
Okay.
To walk out with a proposal.
And then that proposal would be what would be voted on, rather than doing that at the work session the day before.
We give staff time to pull some things together in their options, in my opinion, too.
We have a virtual student assignment appeal.
At 4. I got this one hot off the presses.
That in person.
So I'm clearly not here. If you give me a Tuesday free, my day job takes over, so
Yeah.
not in the state. However, I still think, to your point, 2 things. Having chaired this before, I think you have to be very tight because we literally have been on soapboxes when we probably had at least another 40 minutes to actually talk specifically about budgets. Because so much of what we care about is related to the budget, but not really a decision about how we make the proposal to the budget. This is my personal opinion, but I won't be here, so good luck. But I will also say, also having been at this place, and yes, it was tight last year, but we also had ESSER funding last year. So to be clear, this is not like any other year. This is a real cliff, and we're going to have to make changes that we have not ever been faced with in my tenure on this board to really make cuts. Somehow, David and Terry and his team and Mark and now Trish have pulled rabbits out of hats. I don't think there are lots of rabbits left to do that for. And you will hear largely why I also think it's okay to, I don't feel strongly about needing to be here, is because at the end of the day, there is nothing in this book that anybody wants to cut. The reality is, it doesn't matter what you cut, it directly impacts our students. There's not anything you could list in here that I don't personally believe impacts our students. And it's just a hard decision. And as I told the chair, and I actually said it last time, there are 2 things that I'm going to be here for. That is to raise our teacher pay and to raise our non-certified pay. Because they are why we do, and only way we can do our business. So that's all you need to know from me is whatever decisions you make, I'm going to still stand in the same place, that those are my priorities in this budget. And at the end of the day, as I said at the last board meeting, we can ask for what we want to, but we'll be at this table, again, post the budget, because ultimately, we're not going to get everything that we need. And that, for me, is when is most valuable to be at this table, because those are the final decisions. This is what we're giving the commissioners. It is, for me, our budget is our hard work, which is why I'm articulating very clearly my hard work is ensuring that we pay the people who make our lives possible to actually be an educational institution. And I consider all of those people educators that touch our students every day before they go in that building and sit down. So that's everybody. Our bus drivers are seeing us, and our educators, and every other person in that building wrapped around our kids. That's my heart work, and that's what I'll send to the commissioners. And the real work happens after we have final numbers from the commissioners and the general assembly. So for me, I feel I'm okay with you having a special call meeting, because my heart is very clear and I've articulated it, which is why I didn't have a lot to say today, because I'm like, this is just us chatting. The real work is once we actually have final budgets and have to do the real hard work.
Okay, so to catch everybody up, it's been proposed that we come back for another work session, currently not scheduled. We do have some time available, Tuesday the 30th, where we could come back for a scheduled work session about this, where we would basically take the information that the staff's going to work on, synthesize, put some dollars behind, and then try to come out of this specially called work session with what would be the board's recommended budget that would then be considered at our meeting on
The 7th.
the 7th. And I want to make sure I understand too, so we wouldn't use that work session on the 7th for any budget.
I'm just concerned with staff bringing something on the 7th that we can't agree to. That's my concern and my reasoning for wanting that extra. Because I feel like if, on the 30th, if we are almost there, can't quite get there, what have you, we know we have to get there on May 7th.
Okay, so
Does that,
So then, the goal is to come up with it on the 30th, but then that other work session before the budget meeting would be a contingency in case there was some final thing to work out. Is that more accurate to what you're thinking?
for me?
Okay. But because this involves everybody, and because it's a meeting that wasn't scheduled, and we've already heard from one member who cannot be here on the 30th, I wanted to make sure that we had all 9 of us either a thumbs up or a thumbs down on availability to come back on the 30th. Hold on, I know some people are still looking. All right. So it sounds like we have 8 of 9, and we've been given the green light from the one who cannot be here to proceed in her absence, having stated her case very clearly. So in that case, if we can, we'll need to work with Ms. Allen and get notice out. And
What time would that be?
so executive is scheduled for what time? Okay. It is on a Tuesday. So we have an 11 o'clock executive
And 4 PM assignment.
and 4 p.m. and 4 p.m. student assignment appeals. So do we want to come in from 1 to 4? That gives us,
Perfect.
and then we might be able to do the student assignment appeals in person. Okay. All right. Now, we say that we can do this. We have to ask Dr. Taylor and staff. Is that something you all can accommodate? Okay, we don't want to be here without them because that might not get us very far. All right.
You know who our employers are.
All right. So we have a plan for a special called meeting on the 30th. We have some goals that were stated for that meeting. We have a directive to staff and Dr. Taylor to synthesize these ideas, to come up with some narratives for us. I do want to encourage you, again, these are hard decisions. It's easy to find fault with each individual specific one, but we do have to come together to get a budget that we can adopt. So, let's be disciplined, let's do our work, and that'll be our next steps.
It's
Okay?
work session, not board meeting, right?
Yes, it's a work session.
Okay.
And it would be from 1 to 3 p.m.
1 to 4.
I'm sorry, 1 to 4 p.m.
We can do it till 3 if we get done.
Yeah,
Well, I
if
was
we
going
get
to say,
done.
can we alert the student assignment staff that if we are done early, that we might call them down early?
I think we could do that. We'll work,
Just so they're,
they're not working as late. All right, then. Okay, well, with that, are there any final comments related to our budget development in our work session? All right, then we'll call the work session closed. Thank you all for your work today.